Hi, I'm Fernando, and welcome back to our tutorial series released on the first day of every April. This is part 3 of 625,964 of our tutorial to build NASA's vehicle assembly building in hardcore survival. Last year, we made solid progress laying down the foundations by placing the second block. This year, in response to some feedback that we're going a bit too fast, we're going to slow it down a bit and explain some of the mechanics that I take for granted that you might be struggling with. So first up, this is a computer game called Minecraft, and the way it works is it's a projection of a 3D environment onto your 2D computer screen. Essentially, it's like a landscape painting that changes depending on the buttons and inputs you use and some internal state tracking. There's also a thing down the bottom called a heads-up display, or a HUD for short, and that's a fixed 2D projection onto the 3D world of a 3D control panel fixed in 2D space, so that when you look around, it follows you to stay fixed relative to your screen. Now moving is where things get really confusing. You have two main input devices to move the pixels around on your monitor, the keyboard and the mouse. With the keyboard, if you press the escape key, you can go into options, and then go into controls, and then to keybinds, and you can change which keys these are bound to make things a bit easier. So I like to use OPINU. I also have a mod that lets me use the D key to strafe right. Sometimes I prefer that. Anyway, so we'll go back to the game and I'll show you these one by one. So we hit the escape key on your keyboard 4 times. Let's strafe left. So when you press this key, the background of the environment will move towards stage left or the right edge of your monitor. If we strafe right, the background moves towards stage right or the left edge of your monitor from your point of view. Pressing walk backwards is a bit more confusing. It makes more of the image become the background. And finally, pressing walk forwards makes more of the image become the foreground. But there are other buttons. These are a bit more advanced, and we don't need them in this tutorial, so we won't worry about them for this year. The other main input device to control the game is the mouse, and this is where things get really weird. Most people use the mouse on their desk in front of them in the right hand, and if you can't remember which hand is your right hand, I like to hold my hands out in front of me and make an R shape with both hands, and then one of those hands that has the R shape around the right way so that there's nothing left to work out, which means it's the left side. Another concept to get your head around comes from theatres, where they talk about stage left and stage right. So stage left is the traditional side for the actors to leave at the end of the play, and to stop people panicking, someone would run back in and say, it's all right, they have just left. Meaning from your point of view, this is the right, and from their point of view, they have left. Hopefully that clears it up. Okay, back to the mouse, as it's a bit tricky. It's on a different relative plane to the monitor, assuming your monitor is standing upright. In order to explain some directions, we're going to need to understand clockwise and anti-clockwise. I like to imagine a big clock strapped to the bottom of my feet where I'm standing in the middle of it. So when someone says clockwise, they're referring to the direction of that clock in your feet when the clock hands move left to right at the front of the clock and right to left at the back of the clock. If you wear the clock as a hat facing you, this changes the direction, and the front of the clock now goes right to left and the back goes left to right as this is in front of you. Ultimately, if you prefer to wear clocks as hats instead of shoes, you'll need to invert my instructions for the rest of the video and also have a hard think about your life choices and how they got you to where you are today. So pushing the mouse closer to the monitor does not change or move the foreground or background bigger or smaller. Instead, it moves the background to the top or the bottom of the monitor. So this is kind of weird and honestly doesn't make sense to anyone, but some people have learned conventions of which way looks up by moving the background down or which way looks down by moving the background up. If this feels wrong to you, just play with the invert mouse option, which is in settings. Don't actually hold your mouse under your desk when you select this or it gets even more confusing. Trust me, I learned that the hard way. So now when we pull the mouse directly across your body in a clockwise manner with the feet strapped in the middle of a clock, this will move the background pixels from the right, similar to the strafe left button. But it seems to move them faster and distort the projection around the edges of it as it does. So this is simulating spinning a camera around instead of moving it to the side. So I'm going to show off a bit here and use all of these skills to navigate this 3D world to one of the chests up here. There's a little advanced jump button there. Don't worry about that until next video. If you do get in trouble, my advice is just start again so that you don't have to deal with that. But if you are brave and you think you can do it, then maybe there's some tutorials out there that I could link in the description. Or leave a comment and maybe I'll put out a new tutorial for that next year. We can just focus on jump. So we're going to make it all the way over here to one of our chests. I'm going to do a move called a right click. So for this, I want to use the fingers of my hand to briefly tap the stage left button on my mouse. So don't press the button too long. That's an advanced technique called holding, which we'll cover more in part 417 when we discuss commitment. But if you did this successfully, you'll now be looking at a similar screen to this with a 2D projection, and moving the mouse around now moves an arrow around the screen. So moving the mouse in an anti-clockwise direction relative to your feet will move the arrow closer to the top of the screen. And so here you can briefly tap with the stage right button of the mouse, known as the left button, and then move the mouse in a clockwise direction to follow all the way down to here. And we're going to briefly stage right tap again to here. Now we hit the escape key, and we're going to use those newly learned navigational skills to turn around and return to the location for our next block. Now we need to look at the block, which is not the same as seeing the block. Seeing the block is passive and will happen whether you want it to or not, but looking at it requires intention, which you express by aligning the crosshair on the top of this grass block here. Now, the crosshair is that little plus symbol in the center of the monitor, and it's a bit like the X shape that you make with your arms when you get cross because you're having a bad hair day. So we look at that block, and then we use that clicking action we covered earlier using the stage left button. And that should, if everything's gone correctly, we've now placed our third block. At this point, it's important to reflect on the accomplishments so far. This is not just the third block, it's a milestone. We've reached 0.00048% of the way through our build of NASA's vehicle assembly building in hardcore survival. Next year, we'll be continuing this journey by selecting and placing the fourth block. Until then, I encourage you to practice moving both forwards and emotionally. Thanks for watching, and remember, it's all right, I've just left.